Hello, Lee. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Happy Monday.
Yeah, same to you. Happy end of day Monday.
That's right. That's right. How's the life been here since the last time we saw each other?
Not too bad, keeping busy, that's for sure. How about you?
Same. Yeah, I just realized I might take this off for student's sake for now. But yeah, no, life is good. You know, even busy.
Keeping busy for sure.
Yeah. So I'm your facilitator for this. I know you have there's some others joining you. So once they're on, I'll kind of run through this piece here. I'll change the slide over. And then once the presentation starts, I'll announce the slides and then I will turn off my stuff and just kind of be a fly in the background until the end. So
sounds great.
Nothing new to you, I'm sure, but that way you have that context here.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Hello, Brian.
Hello. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Now I feel like I need a background. I feel like how do I do that? There we go. Well,
Brian, I think we got our matching dress code down just right.
The memo was successfully sent and received. Good.
All right. Hello and welcome. So I know for the three of you, none of this is new, but just so you know, as you can see on the screen, you have 45 minutes. The session's recorded, and then make sure mute yourself when you're not actively speaking. Once we get started here, I'll turn my share screen off and turn that to you. So then I'll just be a fly in the background until the end, and then I will kind of do my closing bit here. Beyond that, there is some Q&A. Don't feel that you need to answer live during that moment. You'll have space at the end for that. And then you can send them private responses as needed as well there. So I guess any questions about any of that? I know for the three of you, this is probably nothing new, but feeling good?
No, you're frozen. Is that just me? I just want to make sure my technology's, or is it just your image?
I hope I'm not frozen, but I may be.
We can hear you, Alex, but I think, yeah, your image is frozen for us.
Yeah.
Let me just see about, how about now?
I still can hear you. No image yet. Yeah, no image.
Is your camera off, Alex?
It should be.
Okay, that's why, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it was on earlier. Right when I joined, I saw you talking, and then it froze.
I'm still frozen?
It's just a black screen at this point.
Oh, okay. That's not fun. I don't know what to do about that. I'm gonna try just let's see here.
Now it's got your screen name on it, the StriveScan 22. I somehow finally fixed Zoom to have my first and last name appear. It used to be like my username.
It looks like we have maybe some attendees who have arrived as well.
Oh, great.
Okay. Well, hello, Lori. Hello, Marlene. I don't know if you can hear me, but we'll be starting here in just a few moments with your amazing panelists here. So just bear with us for a few moments here as we get ready to begin this session. And we'll kind of go from there.
Says Jacob fell down some wet stairs
I do like that headshot of Lee.
And it looks like we have another
Sorry.
attendee. Welcome. Camille, welcome. We're just giving it a few more moments here. We'll get started with the presentation.
That may or may not have been just a few years ago, Beth.
It's a nice one.
I don't let them take a new one at this
I
point.
noticed mine was a younger version of myself recently too, so I've scheduled a time to get a new headshot.
Yeah, I probably don't want to admit how old that one is.
A few more participants. Hello, Carly. Welcome. Give it about 2 more minutes here, everybody, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Yeah. All right, everybody. Welcome to the WACAX DriveScan event. We're excited to have you all here, and we're excited to have our lovely group of panelists here to talk to you this afternoon. A few housekeeping items to kick us off. You will see that there is a Q&A option to send those questions to our panelists, and you'll have the ability to share that at any time. You are muted and your video is off, so just be mindful the panelists can't see or hear you. And we do encourage you to sign up for more sessions at the WACAC website listed there below. And recordings of this session will also be available on that website. With that, we have about 45 minutes together, and I will turn it over to the panelists. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow them to get us started here.
Thank you. All right. So thanks for that. Glad to see we have some folks joining us. I will introduce ourselves, each of us here in just a moment. But first of all, we were hoping to learn a little bit about the audience. If you wouldn't mind just telling us if you're a student, a parent, or a counselor, that would be great. You can just type it into the Q&A, and then that will be also practice for asking questions, which we're sure you're going to do later. So if you're able to just type in there, I'll start while you're typing in who you are. I'll just begin by welcoming you, and thanks for coming to learn a little bit more about what it means to be test optional. We represent 3 different institutions. Of course, our policies are probably going to be a little bit different because we represent different institutions. But in general, test optional means that you the students can choose whether you would like us to consider your SAT or ACT scores or not. So it's a choice. It generally means if you choose to submit your scores, or if you say, yes, please use my scores in my admission consideration, it generally means we're going to consider them. And if you say don't, it means that we're not going to use them, right? And we're not going to hold you, penalize you in any way for not submitting them. But we'll talk a little bit about what that means for each of us. And just to begin, it looks like we have a great mix of both parents and students, as well as college counselors. So, a really nice mix in here. So thanks for everyone for typing in a little bit about who you are. So I'm Mary Beth Petrie. Everybody calls me Beth. So you all are welcome to do that. Brian and Lee will probably call me Beth. I'm the Dean of Admissions at Lawrence University. So we're in Appleton, Wisconsin. We've actually been test optional since 2006. So it's been quite a while since we made the decision to be test optional. For us, the decision had a lot to do with what we were seeing in the trends of what it means to have high test scores or low test scores. On average, the test score ranges were equating to families' socioeconomic backgrounds. And we felt that we wanted to give more power to students to be able to choose whether they want us to consider it or not, whether they feel like they whether the test score is reflective of their ability to do well in college, right? So each person, each student may feel a little bit differently about that. And we asked them the question, do you feel like your curriculum, your grades from school, do you feel like that is enough to stand on its own? Do you feel like that's more representative of your ability to do well in college? If so, then we don't need your test scores, right? On the other hand, if you have a test score that you feel like this is reflective of my preparation and how well I'll do in college, or if you feel like you need to add on to the case, right? That's what an admission application is. It's essentially a case for your ability to be successful at our colleges. So if you want to add it as an additional piece of consideration, there's other optional things that students use to add to their applications. Some send us portfolios, some do admissions interviews, but adding a test score can be a way for some students to continue to make their case if they feel like they need to add that. So typically we would end up at Lawrence with about 25% of our students choosing not to submit their test scores, and it does not affect them negatively in terms of admission or scholarship consideration. Also, we have found that it does not impact them negatively on their ability to do well at Lawrence either, right? So they continue to be successful at Lawrence too. We do ask for their test scores later on, once it's safe, right? Once they've been admitted and they feel, all right, I'm coming here, I'm coming to Lawrence. We ask them, okay, what was your test score? And so that way we can get data over time on how this policy affects students. And we have found that they've done extraordinarily well. I do expect that this year we're going to have a higher percentage of students who are going to choose to be test optional. Some may not even take the test at all. They may choose not to. And I am encouraging families and saying, you know what, that is absolutely fine. There are so many other things to worry about this year. We're all trying to navigate a pandemic for the first time, because none of us were around in 1918, the last time we had one. So we're all, there's so much that we have to navigate. Some people are in virtual school, some people are having to take a different kind of curriculum. And this can be one of those things that they don't have to worry about if they choose to. So I do expect that we'll have more students that will choose not to submit their test scores. So that's just a little bit about Lawrence, a little bit about our policy. It also does not affect negatively students for scholarships, and we can talk a little bit more about that later on. But I'll pass it over to Brian, and he can tell you a little bit about the Marquette policy.
Thanks, Beth. And I want to thank everybody for dropping in the Q&A, kind of who they are, just what their status is. You know, it was kind of neat to see that we've got some students, parents, as well as counselors. If you haven't done so yet, you don't mind sharing, that would be great. But and it's, as Beth said, it's good practice to start using the Q&A, because this really is a panel discussion. We all have a few things to share, and we've got a few questions we're going to pose to each other, but we're really going to look forward to hearing some questions from you all as well. So as Beth said, my name is Brian Troyer. I'm the Dean of Undergraduate Admission at Marquette University. I've been here about 4 years. And Marquette's in a unique situation, I think, in this group of 3, in that we just went test optional about 14 months ago. We became test optional, we announced it anyway, last June, which is pretty interesting because we did it kind of, as my 8-year-old says, in the before times, right? Before there was a pandemic. There's been a pretty broad sweep of universities nationally who have gone test optional here just in the past few weeks and months, in light of the realities that Beth talked about. But we decided to go test optional a little more than a year ago, and we did it for a couple reasons. For starters, I'm a firm believer that anything that we as institutions are going to ask students or require students to submit as part of their application for admission, we need to understand why we're doing that. Why do we ask students for their extracurricular involvement and their leadership experiences? Well, it's because being involved in our college campuses is important to us. The reason we ask for what your academic interests are is important to us at Marquette, because we're a direct admit institution. So if you say you want to be a nursing major, then we want to make sure to evaluate you for the College of Nursing. So we have reasons for asking all these questions, and I actually went to our university archives and I posed the question to the archivist. I said, I'd like to find out when and why we started requiring test scores to begin with. This is before we went test optional. And it turns out that the history of standardized testing in the United States is pretty unique. It's about 100 years old, maybe a little bit more than that now. And it turns out at Marquette, we started requiring tests in the late 1950s for all incoming students. And the goal, of course, was to identify those students who had the best likelihood of success at our institution. And we fast forward about 60 years later, what we realized is the information that we get on the rest of the application is pretty well sufficient for establishing whether or not a student can be successful at Marquette. Most notably, and I believe all 3 of us would agree, the performance that we see on your high school transcripts, our students' transcripts, is absolutely the best predictor for us of who's going to be successful. But really, the ACT and the SAT, as they're designed, their goal is to try and help us predict what a student's first-year GPA will be in college. And unfortunately, they just don't do it that well, or certainly they don't do it as well as the other factors that we see in the application. So that's a little bit about why we chose to go test optional. As Beth said, we have this first year, a little less than 20% of our applicant pool chose to not submit their test scores. We do anticipate that number will increase. And in fact, early on, as our applications are now live, we're seeing that a slightly larger portion of the applicant pool is choosing to apply test optional. But I think that's the word I just wanted to emphasize, is that it is a choice, right? This idea of it being optional. I think for all of us, when you go into the application, before you click submit, you'll have the opportunity to tell us, yes, please consider my score, or no, I prefer you not consider my score. That helps us, because then we don't mark your application as incomplete while we wait for a score if you tell us that you're going to be applying test optional. And much like Beth, and I think this is something we will want to talk a little bit more about during the session today, is the fact that by being test optional, one of the things that was very important for us was to not have students or parents or counselors try to figure out a system that we're trying to conjure up and try to make sure that you aren't missing out on anything. So one of the things we're very upfront about is that students who choose to apply with a test score or without a test score have exactly the same opportunity to be admitted to our academic programs, to receive merit-based scholarships, and to be considered even for some things that are further maybe down the road in college, like internships, career opportunities, placement into certain professions, things like that. One of our most selected programs at Marquette, for example, is the Pre-Dental Scholars Program, where students can shave a year off of their bachelor's degree plus dental school, and it's an incredibly selective program. And yes, students can even apply test optional for that. And we had 2 students admitted to that program last year who were test optional. So hopefully today we can maybe dispel some of those myths or concerns. I'll close just with a few words of empathy as we've been hosting visitors on our campus recently. Just knowing that for you students who are seniors this year in particular, you probably wrapped up your junior year feeling like all of this would blow over and you would have a quote unquote normal senior year. And here we are starting another school year, and things just feel stressful. And I think one of the goals that we have, all three of us, is to help alleviate some of that stress and help you kind of hear straight from the source what we mean when we say test optional and how that might impact you as you go through this process. But we know for parents and counselors as well, this is useful information. So thanks so much for joining us today, and I will hand it right over to Lee.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lee Malejic. I'm the Dean of Admission at Ripon College. I've been at Ripon, this is my 19th year. So I started right out of my undergrad, and I've been here ever since. And Ripon went test optional 5 years ago. So we've had our entire student body has currently had the option to go test optional through the application process. And it's something that over the past 4 years, typically on average, about 2/3 of our students end up doing. When we first started, we were probably closer to that 75% range that Beth had mentioned. And we've dipped down a little bit each year, and I think a lot of it has to do with us working with our counselors, working with our students in order to really educate them on the process. And that's what we're really here today, is to help educate on the process and what it means. So we certainly hope that you find this helpful. For Ripon, I'm gonna echo a lot of what both Beth and Brian said in terms of the reasons why. I think we all institutions looking at going test optional for very good reasons. And it's really for the students' benefit. For Ripon, it was very mission driven. Ripon has always served students that come from first generation backgrounds very well. And that's a group of students that don't always necessarily have the advantages of having a lot of test prep, that don't necessarily perform well on test scores. And we have found, just as Beth and Brian have mentioned, we have found students that have performed well academically in high school for the first 3 years of their high school careers. They do very well on campus regardless of their test scores. So for our admission and probably more importantly for our scholarship committee, they really hone in on those grades that students are having at high school and the courses that you're taking in high school as well. So that becomes a really important part of the process and part of what they're looking for, because they're looking for fits. The last thing that our admission, our scholarship committee wants to do is set anyone up not to be successful in college. So really, just as you're looking for a fit in the college search process, it's very important that we're looking for students and we're accepting students that are the right fit for Ripon as well. So in the last couple of years, as I mentioned, we're at 2/3. I think Brian mentioned, and both Beth and Brian mentioned, this year being a little bit of a change. We've actually seen a flip this year with our applications, where almost 2/3 of our students are applying currently as test optional, where typically we've seen more than half apply that they'd like their test scores considered. This year, that's different, and we're living in a very different world. So if you're on this Zoom today, you're definitely have an interest in it. I think sometimes students feel that they're out on an island when they're thinking about things like this, and I'm the only one that might be considering this. That's definitely not the case, and it's something where students can apply and really benefit from the ability to have this as an option. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Beth, and we'll either take a few questions, I think, or we're happy to answer a few of our own questions.
Yeah, the thing that I love about hearing from all of us at once is that theme of trying to do what's right by students, right? And constantly trying to learn from history and from data, and learning how we can adapt and change in ways that is beneficial to students, and making sure that our institutions are places where all students can have access to, right? And so that really was driven home listening to the two of you. We do, as Lee mentioned, we do have questions for each other, but we're actually much more interested in your questions. And so if you do have questions, just feel free to pop them into the Q&A section at any time. And we will go ahead and then take turns kind of kicking it off to each other. So it looks like we do have some questions already. We'll start with someone who's been doing a lot of homework and research on test optional institutions, who says that over the past few years, in comparing similar students with similar GPAs and similar course rigor and so on, that they're seeing applying to test optional colleges, the students with stronger SAT and ACT score end up with more merit scholarships than students who were test optional. And then they go on to ask, do you feel that this will continue this year, since many schools will be going test optional for the first time, and there will be a fair number of strong students who will have test scores from last fall? So what do you think, Brian?
I'm happy to maybe start, and then you all can kind of fill in the gaps. But one of the first things I want to share, I shared earlier in my introduction that we just went test optional a year ago. And just to put things into perspective, at that point, I think we were right around, I don't know if it was about a third of US four-year institutions were test optional. It was a growing number. At this point, we are now, or it was close to half, excuse me. We weren't quite there yet. And I think last week I saw that we are now over 2/3 of US four-year institutions are some flavor of test optional. And we'll kind of talk about what that might mean. But I think that's important context to even answer this question, is to understand that for many institutions, this is brand new. Some institutions said, well, they're going to pilot a test optional policy for 1 year. Some said, well, they'll pilot it for 3 years or 5 years. And some said, nope, we're going to be test optional in perpetuity. Whatever that might mean, one of the things that I think is a natural stressor for parents, for students, for counselors is, how do I make sure to put the student in the best chance to receive best consideration for acceptance to the institution? And then what this question speaks to is the best chance for merit-based scholarships. And that's tricky, because I would venture to guess that all of us do this slightly different. I want to go back to what Beth said earlier, though, and just strongly recommend that students, for example, on our website at Marquette, we have an FAQs page about test optional. We share kind of what the mid 50 percentile of students admitted to our various colleges might be. That information might be useful, and we actually link to that from the application itself. So hopefully you can go in making an informed decision. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I think I want to stress is the importance of just considering, as Beth said, is this a piece of data or evidence that you would like to include in your file or not? And if it's in there, we'll consider it for merit-based scholarships. If it's not, then we won't. And one of the things I think that many institutions have been doing for years anyway, is trying to de-emphasize the test, even if they were still requiring it. And now, almost out of necessity, we're seeing that now a significant majority of US universities have gone test optional. So I'll let you all kind of chime in a little bit. I just wanted to maybe provide a little bit of context there, because this is going to be new for many of us. I can tell you that in our first year under a test optional policy, we didn't see a wild swing for students necessarily receiving more or less merit-based aid, because right out of the gate, we wanted to make sure that no student would be penalized either for submitting a test score or for not submitting a test score. So I'll pause there and let maybe Lee, if you want to chime in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us anyways, and this was something that I wanted to mention earlier as well, is students that choose to go test optional for Ripon really benefit most probably with the merit aid end of it. For our students, we typically in our applicant pool, we accept about 2/3 of our applications coming in. Out of that group, there hasn't been a big change since we went test optional. Students that were being denied are still being denied, even though if they go test optional. Where the change has really been made is in what students are earning for scholarships, because they are deciding to go test optional. We can then look to put more weights for those high achieving students on that GPA specifically, so that they are then earning more in scholarships rather than being pulled down by maybe a test score that doesn't necessarily equate to the GPA that they have. So in some cases, you're going to definitely find where it's much more of a benefit for students that don't have as high of the test score, but have all the other accolades that go along with being a really strong student, and students that all of our institutions want to join our community. So it's a little hard to say. I think to Brian's point, it's a little hard to say what all the new institutions will do that are coming on board, because it's been a very short ramp for them to be able to figure it all out. And the merit piece, I would say for us, the merit piece probably, we had a little bit of a learning curve just to be able to we've had the same policy, but in terms of how it most benefited our students and how we can talk about it and work with our students on it, that's been fleshed out kind of over the last couple of years. And Beth, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I actually was thinking about the first part of this question and kind of the lineup for the question itself, in the trends that this person is seeing with colleges offering higher scholarships to students with tests. And I was wondering to myself, why might that be? It could be some colleges still ask for tests for scholarships. So I just want to be clear about that. We said earlier, every institution has a little bit different way of approaching this. But the other thing that it could be is self-selection, right? So students with high test scores being more likely to submit their test scores in the first place, and therefore getting higher scholarships because of it. And what Lee just said is that the policy really does still benefit students who have great grades, great courses from high school, but maybe a lower test score. They may choose not to submit their test score, and they'll still be very competitive for admission and scholarships. So that's my I guess at what could be going on there. So Brian, do you want to take the next question?
Absolutely. So I appreciate, we have a student who's asked a question. And I think this is a good opportunity just for us to maybe weigh in with some professional, maybe wisdom or expertise. The student's kind of asking an opinion question. They say that they're a senior, they're getting ready to start applying to colleges with schools that have changed their policy to test optional, and they haven't been in the past. What might be our professional or personal opinion on how to go about applying for those types of schools? I think we've touched on some of the topics here, but I think this is a useful opportunity just for us to share a little bit as students approach this. This is obviously hopefully the first and only time they're applying to be an undergraduate student somewhere, and this is all new for them. And so what might our advice be as they begin applying? Lee, do you want to take this one?
Sure, I'll kick it off and then pass it over to Beth for any other comments. But I think one of the biggest things when you're looking at schools, and of course schools have a range of academic preparation for their students coming in. So some of the things that you want to take a close look at are what their admission standards are, and then what the average student coming into that school is, what their academic background is. So looking both at GPA and an average GPA, an average test score, whatever that might be, and even the mid 50th percentile of test scores can give you an idea of what schools typically admit. And some of the bigger schools that are out there that may have just gone test optional also have sometimes have a little bit more of a robust scale, I guess, in terms of GPAs and ACTs and what they're typically admitting. So you can start by using that. And typically for our students, what I talk to them about is, for us, if your GPA is at or above the average GPA of a student coming into Ripon, which is the 3.4, if you're at or above that and your ACT is at or below, or really if it's below our average ACT, which is the 24, then you should strongly consider going test optional. That's a good indication that your GPA is outpacing kind of where your test score is at, and you may have better opportunities for both admission and scholarship with doing so. Beth, how about you?
I think that's a really good rule of thumb, Lee. Also, just to maybe put the student's mind at ease a little bit, is to maybe peel back the curtain a little bit on what students don't often get to see in our work. Colleges don't go about this lightly at all. Even those that have done so in response to the pandemic. I've personally been having a lot of conversations with other college admission deans and VPs and so on about their interest in becoming test optional, and asking from our perspective, how things look. I've been on a panel recently. I know Brian was on one as well, and we're talking about this with each other a lot. And then these college admissions people get to talk to the faculty about it as well. And the faculty ask them a lot of questions. And so they've put a lot of thought behind it. And my advice is just to trust that they are going about this with a lot of thought and a lot of intentionality. And if you ask them how they will consider your application, they're going to be able to tell you, and it's always good to talk to them directly.
And I would just add, to kind of wrap up this question, that I think one of the things that has gotten lost since kind of the SAT and ACT became so pervasive, particularly in the United States in higher education and college admissions, is the fact that, you know, for many, many years before standardized tests were required at many of our institutions, what we cared most about was your performance in high school and the rigor of the courses that you took. That hasn't changed, but because of the kind of the onset and kind of pervasiveness of standardized tests, I often use the analogy of a crutch, you know, that universities have said, well, as long as we have a requirement for an SAT or an ACT, it'll help us validate the GPA that we're seeing. And quite frankly, that's just not what the data bears out. And so one of the things, to answer the student's question, I would just say is, you know, keep in mind that, as I often like to say, college isn't 13th grade, right? College is challenging. It is a unique academic experience in the way that it's both academic and co-curricular for students, and it's an entirely new experience for our incoming students. So as you think about where you want to apply, one of the reasons we went test optional is I just cringe at the thought that students were out there Googling what is, you know, this particular institution's required test score. And typically what you'll find is an average. And what we know to be true is that some students will just self-select out of applying at all, even though they might be an outstanding fit for an institution, simply because of that number, simply because of a number that was produced after a 4-hour exam on a Saturday, you know, and that's something that that's one of the reasons that so many universities have gone in this direction. And so I would just encourage every student to kind of self-reflect and say, you know what, I do feel like this test seems to be in line with where my GPA is, and I want universities to see this and consider it for merit-based scholarships and for admission. That's fine. But by giving you the choice, and also, every institution, I think all of us sound pretty consistent. You know, we're not going to preclude students from qualifying for certain scholarships or scholars programs if they don't submit a test. I think it's important to ask institutions. But at the end of the day, if you feel like it represents part of your kind of the evidence of your academic abilities, then include it. But if not, be sure to know where you're applying and who requires it and who doesn't. But once you kind of have that list, you should be able to move forward after asking some of the questions we've raised here of the institutions, move forward feeling comfortable like you're not going to get penalized for not submitting it. So it does take a little bit of research and just kind of keeping your eyes wide open as you go through this process. But it's a great question.
We have another great question here I'll direct towards Beth maybe to start with. Some students may have the chance to take the SAT, ACT in the fall. If they plan to apply early action or early decision and may not get their scores back until mid to late October, how should they apply with or without scores?
Yeah, that's a good question. It would be worth asking the institution, especially if you're applying early action, early decision, you must be very interested in them. So it'd be worth asking at what point do they need the additional materials for the application, right? So for some colleges, they need all of it by the deadline, right? They need the transcripts, the whatever else they ask for, letters of recommendation, so on, by the deadline. Some have a grace period after the deadline, and it's worth knowing if there is an opportunity for that grace period. Another good question to ask is, will you accept my self-reported score, right? So at Lawrence, we accept self-reported test score. So if a student says, yes, I want my test score to be considered, they can fill in a form or they can put it on their application, either way, and tell us what their scores were for each test sitting. We'll still super score it and consider that. And we'll ask for the official test scores only after the student has decided, yes, I'm coming to Lawrence, and paid their deposit. And then we'll say, okay, now you need to send us your final high school transcripts and you need to send us your official test scores. And that can make it a little easier on students not to have to pay for sending their test scores to a lot of different colleges. At least this is one that they can send to only if they decide to go there. So that's a good question to ask. But then the other thing, and I'm going to kind of look to Brian and Lee, I think we are still, as a profession, highly encouraged to not have deadlines before October 15th. Am I right? Yeah. So a college could be rolling admission, and you can apply now, and you might get a decision in a few weeks. I believe maybe Marquette and Ripon are rolling. Is that right? Okay, so I won't speak a lot on that, but I will say Lawrence is a deadline college, right? So we ask students to apply by a certain date. Our first deadline is November 1st. And I think that most colleges should still be allowing students to wait at least until October 15th before they are requiring that students apply by a deadline. So.
Yeah, I would just chime in and echo a lot of what Beth said. Yeah, we are rolling admission. We'll begin. So we've been collecting applications now. We won't formally begin issuing decisions until mid-October. Then we'll do so on a rolling basis. And I think one of the themes, so I think in all of our lives this year, in whether it's in your professional life or for students, your academic life, is knowing this profession of college admissions. One thing I think is important for students and counselors and parents to hear is, we often talk internally, like Beth said, to our colleagues, and it's important to remind you all that we are the Office of Admission, right? Not rejection. We are looking for ways to support students in this process. And the word that really has stuck out to me in this past 6 months has been extending grace to people, understanding that, sure, a lot of college websites have posted deadlines out there about an early action, early decision deadline. But then there's this reality, and one of the things that's unique about this particular reality with the pandemic is that while it's affecting the entire globe, in the United States, we've seen how it has impacted different pockets of the country at different times, and that has then created issues with access, for example, to standardized testing. And so one of the things I think students that we would really encourage you to do is understand that yes, this is an important process. This is an important milestone in your lives, and you've got resources like us to help guide you through that. But you should never shy away from asking those difficult questions. Hey, I would like to apply early action, but I don't think I'm going to get my test score to you in time. What is that grace period that Beth referenced earlier, or what options might I have? And the thing is, we all employ staffs who love those types of questions and want to help students, but this is a good opportunity, particularly for seniors, to develop some of that autonomy and to really do some of that self-advocacy to make sure that you're making an informed decision with each of us. So one of the things I always often lament is, I think all of us, Lee, Beth, myself, we all want to make this process as stress-free as possible, but when like 3,000 universities do it simultaneously, we understand it can get kind of stressful for you. So just know that we're here to help and to kind of provide that guidance along the way.
Just to add to that, two words that I've been using almost on a constant basis this year has been flexibility and engagement. And you'll want to check, like Beth had said, with schools individually in terms of how much flexibility they do have with their deadlines. Some don't have as much, but the engagement part is something that you certainly can take with you and carry that regardless of what schools you're looking at. That's something that schools are definitely looking for, and something that I worry for our students this year, because we are living in this world. But something that I really encourage students to do is to be engaged, to stay engaged within the process. And with doing that, you're going to find the right fit wherever that may be. So that's an important piece, and something that may be easy to forget this year, or maybe easy to become disengaged, but please do. And as Brian said, that's what we're all here for. We're definitely here for that.
Yeah, it's one of the silver linings, right, in this opportunity is that that we're all now available anytime, and in any way, even from towns and cities that you may not be able to get to our campuses as easily. Well, now it's easier to contact us. So we do have another question, this time about the correlation between test scores and affluency or socioeconomic status, right? So the question is there a consideration for schools to move from test optional to test blind, which means that they will not consider test scores even if you want them to, right? In order to be more equitable, have you engaged or heard of some of those conversations?
Yeah, I'll quickly chime in and just note for my fellow panelists, we have a hard stop at 4:45, so we might have this time for this question, maybe a few final comments. If anybody has a quick question you want to drop in there, please do. But frankly, yes, I think institutions around the country are grappling with, well, if we find that the tests aren't providing all the information we had once hoped they would provide, why even require or offer them as an option at all? And I think the short answer is kind of a troublesome one, and that is, well, it's kind of because everybody's been doing it, right, for decades and decades, that try as we might to really try to keep students focused on their academic performance in high school, right? 3 years of performance is a much better indicator to us than a Saturday, morning exam that you might take. I think that the fact is that there is just an enormous amount of, I don't know if we would call it cultural pressure or societal pressure, whether it's not just in the United States, but really there's kind of a global push for trying to find standardized ways of measuring whatever it is that these tests are trying to measure. I think it's a really difficult question, and the truth, I'd be lying if I said we hadn't talked about going test blind. And one of the things we have to contend with is the volume of students that are in high schools, frankly, that build into their curriculum some type of test prep, right? And then if all of a sudden universities are no longer even considering that score, what signals is that sending? So I think it's a great question. I kind of love talking about this topic because I think it's an important, really ethical conversation to have for institutions of higher education, along with the K through 12 education community and students and families as well. So that's kind of my sort of broad level. I don't know, Lee, if you've had similar conversations or if you have anything else you'd like to chime in on here.
I think it's becoming a really interesting topic. I think first, schools, particularly schools that are just going test optional right now, will have to get over this hurdle, right? So in the next, and that'll take a couple of years even. And personally, I think some schools are saying that, it may be, they're just going to do it for a year or a 2-year cycle, and then they're going to go back to looking at test scores. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. I think that's going to be the conversation first. And then as more and more schools move towards being test optional, then test blind comes in right behind that, right? So once schools figure this piece of the puzzle out, there's always something next, and that very well could be what's next down the path. I don't necessarily think it'll be in the next year or 2 years, but if you look at the next 5 or 10 years, that could be something that's very, very possible.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in the meantime, to take heart in the fact that at least a test optional policy empowers the student to think about their application and what they want to include, right? And what pieces of their story they want to tell and how they want to tell it. And so for now, I think that is just a great opportunity for students and perfect for this generation who is accustomed to kind of curating their story, since they were young. And so I think that's great for them. But yeah, it's very possible. And I have heard, some keynote speakers at conferences, talk about this more than I ever have in the past. So it will be interesting to see what the next few years hold.
So looking at the clock and seeing we just have a couple minutes left, and these are limited to 45 minutes total. So just maybe any parting thoughts, Lee or Beth?
Sure. I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, but definitely use the application process, use the opportunity to go test optional to tell your story, to let the schools that you're interested in know that you're pursuing them for a reason, and it's because it's the right fit. One of the parting things that I'll say is the time for filling out your application is not the time to be modest. I mean, so many times I talk with students, they're awfully modest when it comes to the application process. And they forget about the community service that they did or the fact that they were the president of this organization. Don't be modest in your application process. Don't sell yourself short that way. Between that and being engaged, that would be the one parting comment that I'd make. Stay engaged in the process, and by doing those two things, that'll certainly help you find the right fit at the schools you're looking at.
I agree. Use some of the opportunity that we have right now to reach out, to see people face to face that you might not otherwise be able to see, even if that is a 2D version of their faces, right? And I know, I just want to say, you know, I have kids of my own, and we're working through school situations and everything this year. It's stressful, and so I think grace is the right word for it. Whether it comes with time or whether it comes with forgiving yourself for certain goals that you might have had that you want to put aside right now so that you can work on something that really is meaningful, that's okay too. So, yeah.
And I'll wrap up here just echoing what they said, and just really wish, particularly the students, but all of you, good luck this year. And just recognize, I think it's important to put things into perspective. You know, 1 year from now, students, you'll be on somebody's college campus, right? That this is an opportunity for you to kind of develop some of that autonomy that you have, and get a little bit selfish, I like to say sometimes. Yeah, Lee said, don't be modest. I think that's important to understand that in addition to trying to figure out which colleges are going to accept you and what mechanism they'll have to accept you, it's also important to consider kind of what you'll bring to the table and what colleges can be doing for you, and making sure that you find the right kind of academic fit, that personal fit that you're looking for. So we just encourage you to use all the resources at your disposal, and we're so glad that you took time to join us today. Anything else that we wanted to share as we wrap up, folks?
I think we can put our contact information in the Q&A so that folks can see that. Oh, Lee's got it on a slide. Here you go. Perfect. So now you know how to contact us, how to find us.
Awesome. Well, thank you to our wonderful panelists for joining us today and providing that input. Just a couple of final notes from WACAC. Our members here, just remember you can go to wacac.com and get more information and recordings of all of this, and continue just to stay engaged with all the different panels coming up as well. But otherwise, thank you to the three of you. You are all amazing, and thank you for our participants for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great day.